I have to apologize a little bit. I took somehow too much seriously that this is an exploratory workshop. So my work is more work in process and full of gaps. I'll start with some preliminary reflections on the title actually of our conference, and which is experience and non-objects. And I think that we need to distinguish between object and objectification, and that phenomenology is more a critique of objectification. So, as I understand phenomenology, we don't concern too much with objects. So our way, our access to non-objects is not via theorizing object, but via theorizing objectification. So what I'm going to present a little bit is a critique of objectification as a way to non-objects. I wouldn't claim that there is something like non-objectification, no, but there are several versions how to somehow overcome objectification and still remain within simple human thinking and experiencing. So there's more than objectification. There are actually two types of objectification. One connected with perception, simply we see something as something and we tend to understand it as objects. And then language, when we speak about something, we tend to speak about it as an object. And I think metaphysics, the classical one, at least the traditional one, combines both approaches, objectification by perception and by language, to constitute an entity. About this claim is actually important for me since I'm going to criticize Heidegger. If you take a look, if you remind yourself about Aristotle, for example, so he combines an understanding of perception, taking entity as to simplify a combination of a substance and how we call it in English, accidents. And the same is, well, something analogical is in his analysis of language, in categories. Again, you have substances and then accidental properties. I just mention it to somehow underline the fact that really metaphysics combines perception and language to objectify an entity as an object. But phenomenology, mainly Husserl, does that. He simply says no to metaphysics, no to this type of objectification. And I think, and I follow Merleau-Ponty on this, that he does so by accentuating perception, but not taking it as a way of objectification. I think that Husserl showed us a new approach to how to understand perception without objectification, but also without the trick of language, as I call it on the slide. We speak about non-objects, and the language tricks us as if non-objects are entities, but they are not. So my aim in this talk is to introduce phenomenological approach to non-objects, to their phenomenality, and I will follow the premise of perception in phenomenology, which is important also, I guess, for the phenomenology of religious experience. I I'm going to speak about topology of invisible or indiscernible. I never use this word, which is in the title of the conference, indiscernible, before. I spoke all the time about invisibility, but as you will see in my talk, I recently focused on sound perception. So I think invisibility is now, for me, at least, too much related to sight, to visual perception. I think we need to overcome it somehow. So this is a short overview of my talk. Actually, the main setting of this talk is what I call phenomenology of phenomenology. Again, it's a term borrowed by Merleau-Ponty to express two moments actually of phenomenology. But one is simple methodological self-reflection of phenomenology, but the other, which I connect with this notion phenomenology of phenomenology, is that while we conduct phenomenological investigations, it generates new experience. And it generates like new phenomena. New phenomena are emerging while doing phenomenology. And it's interesting to do the phenomenology of these new phenomena. And I think, again, it can provide us some access to the theme of non-objects and religious experience too. So in my talk, 4 steps, depending on time, I can skip the last one. First, I will somehow contrast Heidegger with Husserl and Heidegger's approach to hiddenness versus Husserl's approach to invisibility. We'll see. Then I'll remind briefly Henri and Merleau-Ponty and how they speak about invisibility and how it can help us to somehow speak about topology of visible and invisible. In part 3, I will introduce my ideas about how to approach invisibility and indiscernibility. And then you may be surprised by what sound work. Why is it there? It's a short report of research I've done recently. It's connected to my idea that the works of art actually could serve as interfaces of the invisible. Very simple idea. Well, I may explain it more in the part 4. So I have pictures on the part 4. So we will have some time to. So now part 1. This is just the first sentence is just a reminder that phenomenology is a critique of objectification. The main concern is objectification, and that we cannot approach something and non-objects directly. And the first part of talk is a like phenomenological critique of Heidegger's approach actually to hiddenness, when he speaks a lot about the possibility of phenomenological method to uncover what is hidden, what is essentially hidden. And I strongly criticize it. I don't think we cannot uncover that what is essentially hidden. Maybe those are non-objects. Heidegger would say that being itself is a non-object, of course, but this approach, I think it's a phenomenological mistake that Heidegger does in Being and Time. So it's not a question of uncovering. It might be the approach to non-object might be a question of manifestation, of detection of non-objects, but I put this in questions. So how to approach non-objects? If we don't want to use the trick of language. We cannot trust our language. We speak about non-objects, but is it an entity? What is it? How to approach it? How to uncover it without making the same mistake as Heidegger is doing? More on it later. So, as I already said, I follow the premise of perception, since I think that perception is not just objectification, it's more, could be orientation, it could be understood as an immersion within a phenomenal field, for example. Again, I follow Merleau-Ponty on this. It could be understood as a localization. When I perceive, I localize myself within the phenomenal field, the visual field, the sonic field, auditory field, and so on. So, let me introduce the notion of phenomenological situation. It's again a notion of phenomenology, of this self-reflection of phenomenological method and phenomenological work. Actually, not so many phenomenologists pay attention to methodological decisions that they are making while starting the research. I think, for example, Heidegger did actually this mistake, that he situated phenomenology into a situation of appearing. And he did it by going back to the metaphysics of Aristotle and Immanuel Kant. Being and Time originally is a book on Aristotle and Kant. It's not a book on Husserl, it's not a book on phenomenology, actually. It's, you know, I hope you agree with me. And Heidegger wasn't sensitive towards the, what I call here, phenomenological situation. It's not that I, as a phenomenologist, am situated somewhere, for example, at the Duquesne Silverman Center, but the way how I do phenomenological research situates phenomenology somewhere. And I guess we need to pay more attention where, if you are asking a question concerning the nature of religious experience, we also situate phenomenology somewhere to some situation. And I think a part of phenomenology is reflect upon this situatedness of phenomenology. So I in this talk, I distinguish between these two situations. The first one is Husserlian original situatedness of phenomenology while using phenomenological reduction, which is a moment that early Heidegger doesn't apply. Husserl situates, Husserl actually somehow defines a phenomenological domain. I'm sure you mentioned that across all the work, Husserl speaks constantly and repeatedly about grounding and founding of phenomenological domain, that it should be invented, it should be founded, it should be somehow not uncovered. It's good that Husserl doesn't use this language of uncovering, but we should find it. We should somehow localize ourselves somewhere. So Husserl was very much aware about the fact that we situate phenomenology always while doing phenomenological research. It's for me, it's the strongest moment of Husserl's work, actually, this question of situating phenomenology. Whereas Heidegger using simply getting back to Aristotle in most of the initial question he has, situates phenomenology into the phenomenological situation of apophansis. This is the Greek word, or appearing. And we can contrast it very nicely by contrasting invisibility with hiddenness. So this is Heidegger. My claim is that he somehow keeps the objectification that was in traditional metaphysics related to perception and language, to this combination of perception and language. You may nicely see it in Kant, the cooperation of passivity, of perception and activity of reason. Heidegger, even in his early, in Vienna time, he refuses to, he criticizes objectification, but he somehow keeps it by going back to Aristotle and Kant. You know that the second part, the unpublished part of Being and Time, was dedicated to Kant, and that it was then published in the book Kant and Metaphysics, the question of metaphysics. So those are the famous parts of Being and Time, paragraph 7, number C, which is an alternative foundation of a phenomenological method. It was actually Heidegger is very clear in his purpose that he wants to define, to explain what phenomenology is. But surprisingly, it surprises me always when I read it. He goes back to Aristotle, back to the Greek notion of logos and apophansis, and what's phenomenon mean for all Greeks, ancient Greeks. It's pervasive. It's beautiful in a way, but I guess that he makes a big mistake by situating phenomenology to appearing. And you know, in Prague, that there's a long and strong phenomenological tradition, mostly coined by Jan Patočka. And when I was educated in my younger days, they always were telling us that phenomenology is a science of appearing. And if you take a look in Patočka, even in his later attempts to do some asubjective phenomenology, he still keeps to be close to the question of appearing. The same goes to Eugen Fink, for example. It's all a theory of appearing. I don't think this is the original Husserlian idea. So, does phenomenology means apopheinestheit a phenomena, to let that which shows itself be seen from itself in the very way in which it shows itself from itself? It's all very nice, but then I actually have more. Yeah, I have more slides to Heidegger. If you go further, and Heidegger starts to explain that phenomenology is actually uncovering of what is essentially hidden, I think he contradicts the initial idea of that what shows should be showed from itself by itself. Now phenomenology is an act of uncovering, is a method of uncovering. I will speak later about Michel Henry, who makes similar claims that also speaking about hiddenness and that the manifestation of being itself is somehow manifestation of what is hidden. But I think Michel Henry pays more attention to somehow break the situation of appearing, that it's phenomenology does not uncover something phenomena from Heidegger here speaks precisely that behind phenomenology, there is essentially nothing else. He's aware of the fact that this is a dangerous enterprise, that when going back to Aristotle and Kant, he might tend to speak about some essential hiddenness in terms of transcendence of this another world of metaphysics, which is not for humans, but we can bring something from there. Heidegger is clear that there is nothing else behind the phenomena of phenomenology, but still this attempt to uncover covered-upness is the counter concept to phenomena. He still speaks about Verdeckheit. If you compare it with Michel Henry, Michel Henry is, I think, closer to Husserl on this, that the hiddenness cannot be understood as a cover-upness. So Heidegger, enough with Heidegger. Now, I want to highlight the essential difference between Heidegger and Husserl. And I actually wrote my dissertation and more books on late Heidegger, on Heidegger of contributions to philosophy, and then all the later stuff on phenomenology, on topology of being. And you can see clearly that he himself always criticizes the approach of being and time, and that he would actually agree with this critique that I just presented. And that if you take a look at the fourfold, where he openly mentions Göttliche, the divine beings, or in contributions as he speaks about the last God, he would never say that it's situated into the phenomenological situation of appearing. It's different. So my claim is that late Husserl is closer, late Heidegger is closer to Husserl than Heidegger of being and time. So the core step, as you all know, of phenomenology for Husserl is phenomenological reduction. And I think that reduction should be understood literally as reduction from the Latin word reducere. I don't know what the English pronunciation of Latin would be. It's reducere, like transfer something. So I believe that even in the first version of logical investigations, Husserl wants to transfer the problems of knowledge, problems of experience, problems of consciousness to a new domain. And this transfer should be understood really very literally. So reduction creates a new domain and transfers the description of experience into this specific milieu. if you read then Merleau-Ponty, he likes to use this word milieu, the French word milieu, to describe the nature of the phenomenological field, actually. So I'm following again Merleau-Ponty on this. Let's pay attention to the quote from Logical Investigations. And this part has the same in both versions of Logical Investigation. I mean, before the official use of reduction and after it is the same. So I somehow want to underline the fact that even before speaking openly about reduction and reductions, Husserl uses it. It's still there in this sense of creating new domain for phenomenology, the phenomenological field. So it is the essence of perception that something should appear. It seems very close to Heidegger, right? Again, what was the difference to what I just criticized? I said that Heidegger is forcing phenomenology to the situation of appearing. Now I try to claim that it's different with Husserl. You see, the essence of perception is that something should appear in it. But now he uses this however, and this however is crucial, I guess. A perception. It's in the second version. What's the, I just forgot the English word for the second. And edition, exactly, thank you. Second edition. In the first edition, you have interpretation. So interpretation, however, constitute what we call appearance, whether veridical or not, and whether it remains faithfully and adequately in the frame of the immediately given or anticipates future perception in going beyond it. So to put it like, to simplify, I like to simplify as you already know. Husserl somehow says, well, I don't care that much about appearing. It could be, it could take this way or another way. It could be veridical or not. Actually, phenomena in this sense, it's not my primary concern. My primary concern is a perception, it's interpretation. And how phenomena appear in it. And I would really focus on the fact that interpretation should be understood as a domain. It's not a faculty of mind or some activity of thinking, interpretation. It's a domain. It's I call it sphere of interpretation. Husserl later called it pure consciousness, but pure consciousness, it's not mind conscious. It's not consciousness in the sense of everyday consciousness. It's a domain. It's a field. It's a phenomenological field. So we need to understand it more topologically, using spatial methodology, actually. And if you, again, this is oversimplification, but hopefully it's helpful. If you compare what Heidegger says about uncovering what is essential, well, I know it uncovers itself, and we have to describe it as it uncovers from itself. Okay, but still it's coming towards us somehow. But so my claim was that although Heidegger criticizes objectification, he somehow actually magnifies it or uses it more than metaphysics, since being is coming towards us. It manifests itself, and we uncover it as it manifests itself, but it's coming to us as designs, of course, and so on. But this coming towards us, this revelation towards us is clearly there. But in Husserl, this sphere of interpretation is somehow in between. It's between me as subject and between the reality as something objective. And yeah, it's something between. But when I write about this, I usually speak about transitional area or maybe medium even. So phenomenological field, this sphere of interpretation, this milieu, is an in-between sphere which is invisible, but it's not hidden. It's invisible, it's detectable, but not in the objectifying way. So this is invisibility. This is what then Henri and Merleau-Ponty would call invisibility. It's the characteristics of this in-between, of this. Sometimes when I discuss this with my colleagues from Japan, they have a Japanese word for this, aida. It's aida, it's a word coined by Bin Kimura. It's betweenness, meaning between subject and object, between experience and what is experienced. So enough about this. And last word to Heidegger. In contributions to philosophy, one of the key notions is das Zwischen, the between. And I think it's the way how Heidegger overcomes actually the situation of appearing as coined in Being and Time. So now, briefly to Henri and Merleau-Ponty. Actually, both of them wrote about invisibility at the beginning of 60s or the end of 50s, without knowing each other work, actually. And I'm not that much familiar with Michel Henry. I think many of you know much more, but so just briefly, when he speaks about self-hiding of the essence of phenomenality as the self-manifestation of being, he pays a lot of attention not just to emphasize that there is nothing behind phenomena, behind manifestation as Heidegger, but he emphasizes more compared with Heidegger that this self-hiding actually is in a twofold manner interconnected with appearing of phenomena. When we see something, we experience the self-hiding of the essence of phenomenality in this very fact of perception. So just very quickly, Henri. Goodbye, Henri. Henri is fine, but no questions to Henri. I really don't know him. And Marion wrote a chapter. I think it's included in one of the Henri's volume where he compares Merleau-Ponty and Henrian approach to the invisible. And he rightly says that for Merleau-Ponty, the invisible doesn't have any specific mode of manifestation available that would be reducible to that of the visible. So Merleau-Ponty is more radical, actually, than Henri. For him, the invisible is the invisible of the visible, which is a quotation from his posthumous work. But in science, he compares invisible with immobile. One says invisible as one says immobile, not in reference to something foreign to movement, but to something which stays still. The invisible is the limit or degree zero of visibility. the opening of a dimension of the visible. I think he's very close here to a Husserlian idea of phenomenological field as a milieu which is between subject and object, this transitional area. But when we see something, it's opened in its visibility, and this openness can be theorized as invisibility. It's a simple idea. And in order not to speak about the vision and visual perception, something similar you can say about hearing also. When you hear something, there's this phenomenal field of auditory perception which is opened for you somehow. We can call it also invisibility. I know I combine visible and audible, but I just wrote a book about sounds, and it's interesting that sounds are in a way more phenomenological and more, these sounds themselves somehow demand phenomenological understanding more than visual objects. But what we see is, it's so easy to objectify what we see, right? But it's not that easy to objectify sounds. So phenomenology of sounds, it's a cool thing. So that's it. That's Merleau-Ponty. And now let me bring into the game J.J. Gibson. I believe you know it. His work on eco-psychology, and he's not a phenomenologist, but he was inspired by Merleau-Ponty, even though he doesn't admit it in his work that much, but he was. And I love him for his simple language. He invents new terms and speaks, well, it's not a scholarly speaking, it's simple. And this is my favorite part actually from his work. And I think he precisely captures the nature of phenomenological field as a sphere of interpretation or as a perception, as Husserl puts it. It's Gibson who understands very precisely actually what phenomenological reduction does. It's a reduction to affordances. So when we see something like this chair, for example, it could be understood as an object, but I can also see it as a chance to sit down simply. This is what Gibson calls affordance. This what I experience affords me something. But where is this affordance? It's somewhere between this chair as an object and me as experiencing subject. So affordances are simply localized in the between sphere in this transitional area, which we call phenomenological field. So let's read it, Gibson. Just to hear him, an important fact about the affordances of the environment. They are affordances of the environment, not of objects, but of the environment, is that they are, in a sense, objective, real, and physical, unlike values and meanings, which are often supposed to be subjective, phenomenal, and mental. But actually, an affordance is neither an objective property nor a subjective property. And now I love him. Or it is both, if you like. That's philosophy how I love it. I'm sorry. It's this paradoxical language. It's neither subjective nor objective, but it's both. So affordances, an affordance cuts across, and again, this language of cutting across, this is how he names the transitional area, cut across the dichotomy of subjective objective, and helps us to understand its inadequacy. The same is what religious experience does, right? It shows us the inadequacy of subjective objective dichotomy, and the same is what Husserl in logical investigation does actually. Let me remind you about the Husserl in the first edition of logical investigation, right? And well, ego, I don't know what it is. In phenomenology, I have no concept of ego. I don't need it. That's in the second edition. Unlikely, he writes that. Here, I found it. But the radicality that he doesn't need ego for phenomenology. That's yeah. So, an affordance both points both ways to the environment and to the observer. And I think this is the last step of my talk. We can understand affordances as non-objects. I think that affordances is the model of how to understand phenomenologically non-objects. And I somehow radicalize it in the notion of the interfaces. Instead of affordances, I sometimes speak about interfaces. There are visible, invisible interfaces of our experience, or audible, non-audible, and so on. And I think that rituals, for example, within religious experience, work as those interfaces. Works of art work as those interfaces. And actually, all content, let's speak about content, all content of religious experience has the nature of those interfaces. Well, it's important that those interfaces are localized between transitional area and phenomenal. This is conclusion. What phenomenology does as a method is it reduces our experience to this new domain, which is medially located between psychical and real, between subjective and objective. And this is where we can not only localize those interfaces, but we can even create them. This is the practical moment in our all religion, that we can induce religious experience. We can take an object and make it a non-object, make it an affordance, make an interface, a gate maybe, which doesn't lead anywhere, but helps us to localize ourselves within what Michael maybe understands as the finite province of meaning. I think, yeah. So that's the talk. That's just my version of the how to approach via phenomenology to religious experience and non-objects. And we are probably out of time, so I shouldn't speak about soundwalk. I just show the pictures. It's in church in Czech Republic, in Litoměřice, nice city, and we did a soundwalk, which I don't have any minute, right? It's who's in charge of time? It's Peter.
Take 2 minutes.
So soundwalk is actually an application of phenomenological reduction. When you suppress vision, you have this headphones and microphone, it's interconnected, and you hear more. So you are more sensitive towards the audible version of our environment. So you still see, but you hear more. You see bees and birds, and realize that you are actually that hearing is more important than we usually think. So this is the application of the reduction. Then we recorded the sounds, and the recordings were digitalized, and then sound artists like this guy recreated the environment of the city we walked in. And my point is that they created, actually, I realized that during this experiment, they created the interfaces. So we were in a church, it was an empty church, Baroque, beautiful. I think it was a Jesuit church actually in Phenomenological. It used to be. And they created this sonic or sound interface of simply sounds, and we all were immersed in it. So you cannot see it on the picture, but the church was full of sound. And we somehow were able to walk through the city again, but differently. And this transformation, which was caused by the work of art as an interface, really has, I would say, religious nature. It was something. You see a guy, even he's alive. The immersion, and so this is just, yeah.
We have about 6 minutes for a break. If you want to do questions during the break, they can come to you, or would you rather do a couple right now?
It's depend on your decision.
No, it's your decision.
It's my decision. So few questions, yeah. Okay. So I don't know who. Peter, choose someone.
Oh, well, thank you. I love to talk. I have many questions, but I'll just ask one. But first I'll make a very quick comment. I studied with James Gibson 50 years ago. And spent a lot of time with him on this very question of affordances. And to my understanding, which could be wrong, but my understanding was he is basically a functionalist. And it took me 30 years to shake him off. I mean, he captured me, and it took me a long time to get out from under that. But as a functionalist, the error there was in the point of view, I believe, so that the affordances are a relationship between the animal and the environment. But he often didn't talk about the animal, so that a pond offers locomotion for a duck, but not for a horse. You see, so that the affordances are relative to the animal. And the relationship is a functionalism. Well, he called himself a behaviorist, but he wasn't. He was a functionalist. And the problem with that, I decided after 30 years, is that functionalism is meaningless.
Yeah.
Unless you put yourself intersubjectively into the mind of the animal, then it becomes meaningful, but that's an error in reasoning.
Yeah.
So
that
was my experience with Gibson.
I agree.
Okay.
I'm using him just to illustrate the nature of phenomenological fields in play, and I think he was precise in this, that affordances are of environment, and I'm leaving the rest of Gibson actually away. There's a cognitive scientist named Anthony Kimmerow, actually very good, who tries to evolve the affordance theory further. It's thank you.
One more. You call at this time. You have to call only one more.
Olga, she's the president.
That's nobody else, right? That's a big question. Husserl developed the notion of apophantic logic, and logic is object. So I think we cannot do it now, but I would love to hear your thought on the transitional zone turning into logic.
Yeah, it's a big question. I think he used the term apophantic just as a historical remark. And
Well, we have to talk about
Yeah,
it.
yeah. Thank you everyone.